All right, I am joined by Mr. Mays, the Techno King. Welcome, sir.
Technical king in the house.
That's sort of
Yeah.
your official what do you call this? Welcome on the podcast. The Techno King is here.
Yeah.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here. 3 years later, and
Yes.
it's like really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is where I want to start. I want us to start talking about the podcast. I think the podcast wouldn't have happened if you didn't play a big hand,
Yeah.
major.
I think my thinking is like
Yeah.
sort of is sort of like a fatalistic view on life in general. That if it's like something is going to happen. I mean, there's definitely agency in terms of okay, cool. Look, if we don't do anything, then actually nothing happens. But some of the times it's like if it was going to happen, it was going to happen a bit later, or a bit earlier, in a way. But I think this was meant to happen.
Yeah.
At least in hindsight is always 2020. So it's like you look back, you're like, oh,
Sure.
it's clear that it was supposed to work like that.
100%. Because I think 2020, but I think the official, the ideation of, I guess, for the podcast was 2020, but the actual starting of the podcast was 2021, which is the 17th of March. And I had you as a first guest.
Yeah.
And 3 years later, here we are.
How many podcasts have you had?
So now this will be the 74th.
That's incredible. Yeah.
Excluding the student podcast.
Yeah. That's good.
74th.
That's good.
In hindsight, how did the podcast come out the way you sort of had envisioned, or was it something which this is your baby and take care of it?
I mean, I think it is really about. I mean, okay, fundamentally, the way to think about, I say, the sort of rise of podcasting in general, it's more, these sort of conversations that people have, which are very like simple conversation. You have a call, and you have friends that you would call for like 2 hours, and you and me used to have like these very, very long calls.
Sure.
In a way, and we talk about everything. We didn't call each other often, but when we talk, it's like an hour. Like today, before this podcast, we spoke for like almost an hour.
Sure.
Before that, just like going at it, just like we're having a normal conversation.
100%.
About things, and that's the way to think about podcasting. In a way, it is these conversations that you wish to have recorded. It's basically like this conversation is going to happen anywhere, with or without the camera.
Yeah.
In a way. But now it's basically you realize, okay, cool, if we probably share this with the world, with a lot of people out there, one person is going to learn something. The other person is going to take this and, produce something out of it. Or someone is probably just going to have a good laugh about it, in a way. So I think the idea is basically, how do you sort of democratize information out there in conversations, useful conversations that would normally be private, but they can have so much value if they're shared with a lot of people out there. And I've sort of seen, that happening on Stake, just sort of the conversations that are happening. In a way, my in my thinking there, the way I envisioned it was more, I suppose, a bit more unstructured, in a way, like a bit more unstructured, which is a bit like, so I've started looking at, for example, you look at the kings of podcasting, you look at Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
And Joe Rogan, he basically just, he goes for the conversation, and it's almost like this one. There's a natural element to the conversation that's basically there.
100%.
It's extremely natural. Like someone is basically just having a conversation, and it's not. It seems extremely unstructured. There's still questions now and then, but in general, it's basically just a conversation among friends.
Sure.
In a way, so this is a natural element. Then you get other type of podcasting. For example, Lex Friedman would go like it's question.
Formal,
It's very formal. It's basically questions and answer. You basically get there, but it is also quite deep as well. So it's always about, okay, cool. There are some podcasts with people that you want to go deep into a certain subject. For example, Lex is more technical. So the technical side of things, you really want to ask the questions in a way. Joe Rogan is more comedy and just more broad, general information about the world and all of that. And it's very broad, which means it can be just be a normal conversation with different ideas being thrown around and all of that. Some of them wrong, some of them right, but ideas are being thrown out there. So I think, just sort of it has to be a bit broad in a sense, depending on who you're actually having a conversation with, in a way. So that's sort of what I've said. So it's basically like a distinction between the depth, depending on who you are speaking to, and also the broad range of the conversation, depending on who you're speaking to as well, and what kind of vibe the whole thing is.
Yeah, I think our conversations are more on the unstructured and broad. They can be very deep as well.
Yeah, I know.
And I think for the sake of sometimes you can't really find a perfect match of, are you gonna get that part with different guests because different people. So it's like a dance. Sometimes it's the people who are just sort of the one word answer. They don't go into detail explaining what they're trying to say, which was the reason why we sort of had to pivot into speaking to professionals, because at least we have something, they have something that they know in more detail than this me who's sort of inquisitive to try to understand what they're doing. But yeah, I think I'm just gonna park that on the side. I want to put this. I want to park this on the side. I want to come back again. But first of all, I think this is probably the best way to start the podcast, to say thank you so much, Mr. Mays, for I think as much as you would see it as something light, as investing in me and in the podcast, this has sort of given me something to live for. Get excited. It's like an adventure of my own, and meeting different people and growing. Thank you so much for that initial investment. It means a lot to me, and it sort of gave me, I guess, purpose of some sort to do better. Because even what we're doing now, it might have started as, okay, we want to do something like Joe Rogan, but right now I believe that the purpose has sort of evolved to help a lot of people out there who are sort of benefiting from the conversation that we're having. But that couldn't have happened if you didn't have that initial investment on the podcast. But thank you so much for that, and I think the workforce, they appreciate you for that.
No, but you're welcome. I think it's very interesting to see how the podcast started and how it's really growing into, it's taking a life of its own.
Yeah.
In a way. And I actually brought you something, but
Thank you.
it's in the car.
Yeah.
I brought you a book.
Okay.
By Phil Knight called Shoe Dog.
Nice.
So Phil Knight is basically the founder of Nike. Nike. And so his story is basically the story of a typical entrepreneur who basically goes out there, but who basically lives like every day. It's a real story of an entrepreneur. It's not like one of those beautiful stories where, this person was broke and then instantly became rich. So you get like the story of like the growth of an entrepreneur who has a big dream, but taking that big dream into very practical steps. It's always quite interesting. There's no a real formula to it in a way. Like you have this big vision and everyone tells you, okay, cool, there are 4 steps to that. But the reality is like on whatever dream you have, there are no 4 steps to or 5 steps to. You know, there is a journey and each journey is very different. And you sort of have, you take all these cues as you move and you start looking at the different patterns and you have impressions in your heart to basically move a certain direction. And generally you have to trust those, you know, impressions, because you never know. Some of the times you get here and you meet a different person and this person has introduced you to another different person and now you have more guests on the platform, which is what you need. So I think the journey there has to be, you know, as you go along, you just allow it to sort of take a life of its own.
Yeah.
It's like you have a baby and you have a baby. Initially, you're telling them exactly what to do. You're telling them no, yes. And then the baby starts to grow. What you actually want is the baby to still have the best principles, which is basically the full picture that you have in your head, but you really want the baby to sort of live their own life, take a different shape in a way. So I think that's my well wishes for the, you know, next, you know, decades and decades and decades and decades,
Sure.
You know, of the podcast as well. So, but well done. This is great. And yeah, I'm sure the best is yet to come.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mays. I truly appreciate those kind words. There's something that you sort of I don't want to say live by, but it's one of the statement that you like saying, or you actually have it on your status, WhatsApp status, which is nature loves courage. That's how magic works. Please just elaborate on that. What does that mean for you?
So the idea of nature loves courage, it's really this concept of there are, and I was having a conversation with someone recently and they were like, oh cool, they met someone else who was very pessimistic in a way, right? And they just have sort of a negative outlook on life. This idea that, you know, the universe is somehow fighting against us. Like there is this whole plot against us.
Sure.
So you hear these people who are like, you know, the government is plotting against us. There's some world order plotting to like destroy us. There's this big movement out there that's really there to destroy us.
Yeah.
And generally, life doesn't actually work like that. Generally, if you say, okay, people are against me, but if you think about it, in general, you spend most of your time thinking about yourself than other people. It's very rare that someone is really spending time thinking about destroying you in general. So people in general, they're not against you. Governments, in general, they're not against citizens. Anyway, there are people that are in there that have some incentives to act a certain way, and they act a certain way because of incentives, in a way. So when you think about that, you think, okay, cool. Why are people extremely pessimistic? And to some extent, even very sort of dramatically negative in a way. Like you get around some people, you feel this sort of negative energy, like they're dramatically negative. Like almost everything that comes out of their mouth is like someone is out there to basically get them. So that's sort of the pessimistic side. And you can pick. So there's always this choice where you'd rather be, if you're pessimistic and right, then you're going to live a terrible life. If you're optimistic and right, you're going to live a great life. And you kind of have to choose, okay, cool. I would rather be optimistic. In the moment, you feel good anyway, if you're optimistic.
100%.
If you're right, then it's going to be really great. because now you're optimistic, you feel good in the moment, and you're right, and it actually works in a way. But the question now is, okay, cool. What if I'm optimistic and I fail? The idea is, what is the probability of success if you're optimistic? The probability of success has been shown again and again, and the people that have an optimistic outlook on life, they just become extremely successful.
Yeah.
In a way. Why? Because if you bet on something, it seems as if the world around you reorganizes itself to support you. So unlike the pessimist thinks, okay, cool, look, everything is working against me. But the reality is, it seems as if you have a vision and you have a dream, the world somehow reorganizes itself to support you. So it seems as if nature loves courage. And that is where the magic is, that you make the call, you make the decision, you say, I'm going to go in this direction. And the world reorganizes itself to basically support you. So that is sort of my, that is my philosophy. My philosophy is really, the world is not against me. When I make a call and I make a decision, the world reorganizes itself to support my vision. Does it actually practically reorganize itself to support me? Not really. What happens in practice is I just become more aware of the opportunities that support my vision if I'm optimistic.
Yeah.
It's not like the world is changing. It's like, if you I was thinking about getting a new car now. I'm a big fan of this E-Pace, Jaguar E-Pace.
Okay, sure.
It's very nice. So think of getting that car.
I think you have been a Jaguar.
I've been a Jaguar fan for a long time.
Sure.
So I'm thinking of getting that E-Pace.
Awesome.
You see, I just spoke it, right? It's not like speak it and it will happen, but it's basically like, okay, cool. When I thought about getting an E-Pace, it seems as if when I was driving around, I started seeing more.
Yeah.
Right?
I understand, yes.
Right? It just seems as if I just started meeting people that either selling their car, their earpurse, or stuff like that. It seems as if when I had that dream, the world sort of reorganized. It's a simple thing, but it seems as if the world reorganized itself. But just that I'm now in a mental position to be aware of the opportunities that will lead me to that.
100%.
In a way. But so what I'm trying to say is, it's like you can dream about almost anything really. And the world, nature loves to support dreams. It just loves it to support dreams. Big dreamers, generally, they sort of make it up. And so it's like also like a Steve Jobs thing where Steve Jobs would say, okay, look, if you basically don't dream, you actually cannot achieve what you basically don't see. In a way. So yeah, that's the nature loves courage.
Thank you so much for that. I think it resonates with me. I think I would be a practical example for that, because look at me. I was not a podcaster 2-3 years back, 4 years back, but right now everything about me is podcasting. I think podcasting. And looking at how the dream started, it was not just doing a podcast. It was just doing a podcast, but right now it has more structure. It has a more stronger mission and vision on its own. And I guess nature is sort of encouraging me, and that's how magic is working. Yeah. And 3 years later now, I've met with one of the most influential voices in South Africa, which is Peninsula. And not so long ago, I actually met Mesh.
I'm very interested. Like, in how was the conversation with Peninsula? Like, what do you feel about having the conversation with the guy? what do you think makes his magic happen? Because I think he's very I haven't listened to him quite a lot, but definitely is quite influential in a way.
Yeah.
And what do you think makes that magic happen?
I think, first of all, we'll start with the conversation. The conversation was, I think he is the bigger person between me and him. And I think the first time we met, it was a short brief time. And then when we met the second time, when he came to Cape Town, was he needed someone to assist him with podcasting, right? So that's how nature doing its own thing, right?
Yeah.
So I raised up my hand. I was like, okay, I'll come and assist you. And so we recorded, also, I guess, almost all over Cape Town. And I had to ask some of my friends to sort of, hey guys, I'll be at work, but I'll give you the equipment. You can go with them. So they were sort of going around Cape Town, sitting with him, recording with him. And I think what his story, I think he's the best person to tell his story, but his story, from what I've sort of listened and what I've been following on, is he has been an entrepreneur before.
Yeah.
So he has paid his school fees in that regard. And I think he's an intellectual as well, very sharp. If you guys were to sit in a podcast, I think it would be a very good.
I mean, so what I think, I don't know. Like I heard him speak about. I think he also has like a very strong. I don't think like Afrocentric view. Yeah, I might be speaking nonsense now, but but I haven't listened to him that much. But yeah, I just want to get what his philosophy, what his high level philosophy is.
So he's an, I think, high level probably is an observer, and not only has he observed, but he can also articulate very well what he has seen about the understanding of how human being works, and it's sort of why people sort of gravitate to wanting to hear his opinion, because he has studied history, he has learned about the economy, he has learned about several stuff, and what makes like cherry on top is he's written books about how to parent, and he also has his own books of parallelism, where he sees himself as a god, right? So so that's like another level now. It brings the conversation of the matrix. There are people who are in the matrix and people who are not in the matrix, right? Which is, it still speaks to the sort of the theme of our conversation now, which is nature loves courage. If you're not going the direction of courage, that means you're going to the direction of what the matrix gives you.
Yeah.
You sort of go to school and you sort of follow that, go to school, work, do whatever you need to do, and you sort of die after that. But the moment you sort of go the courage or the adventure route, nature starts bringing all the resources your way to sort of become the person that you are dreaming to become. And I think for him, he has looked at all the different areas of what makes human beings work, and he said, and I think it got to a point where he's mentioning that he wants to call himself a god. I think listening to him is not in a literal sense. Yes, in a literal sense, but not in a literal sense, because being a god, it's something totally different. The levels is totally different, but you understand the concept of where he's coming from, and building a religion is not as easy. And you never know. You might find that there is going to be a cult in the next 20, 30 years formed after him. Because I mean, he has podcasts, there can be so much that can be happen after that. But I think to answer the question is, he has found, he was a millionaire, so he understands what money, the freedom money can bring. And now he's living as a minimalist. And he has found his way around the matrix. And you can't really come out of the matrix, because I think people like Elon Musk, some people still want to cancel them. So you can't really come out of the matrix, but you can sort of somehow find ways of living outside it and sort of popping in there to.
I mean, it's like with the Matrix, it's basically it's a very it's Human Rights Day actually today.
100%.
So it's like it's Human Rights Day.
Sure.
So and I was thinking about it today as well. Like, look, what exactly does Human Rights Day actually mean? And in South Africa specifically, how that was, how this day is basically important in the South African context around apartheid and the sort of massacre that happened, where a lot of people were basically killed for peacefully protesting, in a way, peaceful protesting. And you think about where we have come from, someone being killed for basic human rights, just asking the basic thing about, okay, well, this is, I think I also deserve to basically be at the beach, and then you get there at the beach, you're not allowed to basically sit at the beach if you are a black person. And that was really happening in this country.
Sure.
In a way. So human rights I look at it as just a reminder of, okay, cool, where we have come from, with completely having no freedom. And when we're talking about even freedom of thought, we're basically talking about freedom of just being in a certain place, like everything that has to do with the physical limits of what you can do that another human being can basically do very openly, in a way. So that is sort of the beginning of that, right? Of freedom of just being, in a way. Then you move on to the next level. Once you are slightly comfortable, in a way, where you probably, you have a job and financially you're in a good place and all of that, the next, you start really getting into different levels of just freedom of thought.
Yeah. Like
thinking a certain way. But if you don't have access to good information, then you don't have freedom of thought. You cannot think for yourself if you don't have information. Yeah. Now you have the information. Information is there. Google is there. You can get almost anything that you want from an information standpoint very, very quickly, broadly. Whether it's right or wrong, that's a different conversation. But you can get all that information very quickly. And the next thing is, can you actually express yourself without being cancelled? So if you have an idea that's contrary to someone else, are you able to basically express yourself without someone saying, we cannot have you as part of our business because you are on the side of that, or you are anti that, in a way. And that's where we are at the moment, where if you express yourself differently, you have a different idea about how you see things, when you mention it, it's not like we're having a conversation. When you mention it, it's like you have taken a position. And then you definitely be cancelled for that position. Cancelled means you might not have a job, or someone might not want to be associated with you because you have a different worldview, or you have different thinking, or you're just throwing out an idea just to hear what other people would think about it. So this sort of way we have come. And when people, for example, speak about when people say about the metrics, there's two dangers of what's really going on. The first danger is most of human behavior is around incentives. There is a reason why people behave. No one is crazy, right? I was reading this book and this guy is saying, continually said, no one is crazy. There is a reason why people act the way they act. Okay. So they are not crazy. No one is crazy. It's really about incentives, right? Yeah. How is the incentive structure? Someone is incentivized to act a certain way because of maybe the law, Or maybe if I do this, I get a business. If I do this, I do that. If I do this, so unless you start attacking the incentives around why people do what they do, and start rewarding good behavior, and start, punishing sort of bad behavior, you're never going to get to a point where you can control what's happening in the matrix. And the matrix is not even an institution. It's not like it's not an institution. It's just a way of thinking. Maybe it can be codified into law in some instances, but generally it's just a way of thinking that you're not able to basically express yourself freely without having yourself in a financially difficult position, or having yourself sort of really losing a job as well. But lastly, on this point, it's also a thing of so I understand it's an important conversation in general, because some of the times it affects policy. But what I've realized in sort of a South African context in general, fewer and fewer people on the ground care less about what's really going on around freedom of speech or freedom of expression. What people need at the moment in South Africa is they just need good jobs, good paying jobs. They can feed their families. On the ground, the economy just has to work. You just need electricity. You just need running water. You just need the simple basic things, which are the physical elements that you're talking about. The actual needs haven't been covered.
I think that speaks to the conversation, not the conversation, but I think there is someone called Maslow's
hierarchy of needs.
Hierarchy of needs, yes.
Exactly.
100%.
Exactly. Yeah,
100%.
yeah.
So I think what you're saying actually speaks to that, because I think looking at our economy, I guess, is we're not worried about ideas that much.
Yeah.
As much as we are sort of liberal and we are sort of on the left side of things. But right now, our problems is we need electricity.
Yeah.
We don't want to worry about freedom of speech. That's sort of the least of our.
It's very. It is important, but you realize that those things become more important when people are at a certain economic level.
100%.
When people are at a certain economic level, it just becomes really important. So I'm not saying those conversations shouldn't happen around, okay, cool, what's the freedom of speech? But I think when you're talking about, for example, human rights should be about, okay, cool, did we cover the basics? Did we cover shelter? Did we cover clothing? Did we cover food? Did we cover, now, energy is a big thing as well. Did we cover energy? Does everyone have access to all these basic elements? And then we'll move on to that. So that sort of, that right to have a place to live, that right to have water, that right to have electricity, that right to have now internet, all of that, all those basics have to be covered. Because I feel like I went to this, to one of the sessions last weekend that I told you about on career, career development and all of that.
100%.
And when I started having conversations with people, I gave like this brilliant speech, this brilliant talk on human behavior and incentives and all of that stuff, and how we should look at this. And when I started talking to people, real people on the ground,
yes,
I realized that I'm living in my own head.
Yeah, sure.
I'm living in my own head, and I'm living on the TV and in books too much.
Okay.
I'm slowly losing touch with, and we can also say COVID did that too.
Sure.
Like COVID, you're basically closed in and all of that, and then you're doing your own thing, you're living in your own head, you're reading books, you're watching a lot of things on the internet and all of that, and you start losing touch with what's really going on the ground.
On the ground, yes.
So when you really start talking to real people on the ground, you meet people that don't have a job, you meet people that have a degree and they have a job but they're not being paid well, and they cannot buy a house, and their dream is not really happening. These are real people on the ground. So when you start really having conversations with real people, you realize, no, I'm kind of living, in my own head here, right? All these things matter. They probably matter more in America than they matter actually on 90% of people that are in South Africa on the ground, or in Africa broadly on the ground. So my thinking about the whole idea of like human rights is, how do we fix the basic things? How do we fix the basic things? Basic things like, okay, how do we fix electricity problem in this country?
Sure.
It is fixable. It is technically not rocket science. You can actually fix it. Okay, cool. How do you fix it? First of all, you fix the incentives, right? There is bad behavior here. So you get Eskom having a bad behavior, right? Because of incentives, right? So for example, we're talking recently about when I was in Joburg, one thing I realized Joburg, different in Joburg and Cape Town, is that in Gauteng things actually work. In the Western Cape, things work. Like the cables actually work. The electricity actually works. You still have load shedding and all that, but you don't have all these long outages just for no reason at all, because someone stole a cable, or someone did something for, stop, all these pillars, the electricity pylons. You don't get that problem mainly in the Western Cape, but you get that problem all the time in Gauteng. And you start asking yourself, why are these things happening? So the first thing is, you get someone that gets a contract for 3 years to do maintenance for
a specific area.
For a specific area. And then what they do is, for them to get work, maintenance work, something has to be broken for you to fix it. And then you get there, you start causing the problem so that you can fix it. And you realize the guys that are actually doing this, they know what they're doing. They are electricians, qualified electricians, that are spending a lot of time destroying the cables, or civil engineering technicians that are spending a lot of time identifying where the cable is, getting there, they dig, they fill up, they do all of that. They fix it tomorrow, they come through, they dig the next stage, they cut the cable, they take it. So you start looking at that, why they are creating an opportunity for them.
Yes.
So how do you fix that first, in a way? So you have to think now, how do we basically fix? Who are we basically hiring? Is the term contract element worth it? Do you need to give someone a contract for 3 years to be the sole provider of that? Oh, okay, that saves time, because we have these guys on ready and all of that. In a way, we get that. Is there a better way to basically run that, to make sure that things work? And those are real questions that someone has to sit on the table and answer. How do we fix the incentives around the contractors? The next layer is, how is electricity produced from a generation standpoint? Who generates electricity, and how is it done? Eskom's job and mission should be to say, how do we provide cheap, affordable electricity consistently to everyone, in the country?
Yeah, sure.
Affordable and
consistent
to everyone, right? That's a simple mission at a simple goal. And this doesn't mean that Eskom must do all the work. Doesn't mean Eskom must produce all the electricity. Doesn't mean Eskom must distribute all the electricity. Doesn't mean Eskom must get all the money from the electricity. Eskom should just be a channel that makes this up, because it is a government parastatal. It's representing the people.
It's SOE.
It's SOD, exactly. So the way you actually do it, you say, okay, cool. You're not privatizing ESCOM. You're saying ESCOM should manage all the private entities that are producing electricity, or the homes that are basically producing electricity for themselves, and solar and battery and all of that. If ESCOM pushes that idea to say, let's go to the sun and let's get as much as we can from the sun, let's basically store that, and ESCOM is managing that whole process. That's the way to do it. But ESCOM wants to employ hundreds of thousands of people. ESCOM wants to do everything. ESCOM wants to be involved in everything, and it doesn't actually solve the problem. So what I'm basically saying is, like, we have to like fix.
So that means that the solution is looking like something like having independent power producers, but linked to the grid of ESCOM.
Yeah, so it's basically one concept. So one concept is, you say you make it a bit more decentralized, where the future should be that almost everyone in general should be able to own their electricity. They have it as the resource, which they own. So you have your solar panel on top of your roof, you have your battery stored on there. If you have excess electricity, you push back to the grid. That's fine. But you own your electricity.
Sure.
In a way, you own that. That gives a bit of self-respect, because energy is a big thing. Energy is like, people own houses because shelter is a big thing. 100%. Energy is equally important. You should be able to basically own your own energy and basically store your energy. And that should be the big vision. So you have all this decentralized production of electricity, and then you have storage, and then you have all this sharing economy that happens on the additional electricity that we have. What then the government would do, like, I was of the opinion that everything should be privatized, everything should be owned by, but also I realized there are risks around things like cybersecurity and stuff like that, which is very hard to leave that to private institutions. So you have, for the homes, you have individual power production. That is subsidized by ESCOM, which means ESCOM has to make sure that the grid is basically ready, while they do all of these things, trying to fix what's happening with all the load shedding. They have to think about, how do we ensure that the grid is basically set up in a way that has that big picture in mind about the future.
Sure.
So the big picture is, you're going to have a lot of, not just local loads, like, okay, cool, you have your lights in the house and all of that. You're going to have electrical vehicles. In the next 10 years, you're going to have a big influx of electrical vehicles. Would the grid be ready for what's going to happen at that time? So how do you basically do that? If you have independent power producers on there, you can have every home having a charging station by the roadside, or even small businesses just having a charging station for electrical vehicles by the roadside.
Sure.
So if you're driving your car, you can always have
charging station.
You can have a charging station along the road.
Powered by the sun. That's nice.
Exactly. And powered by the sun, in a way. So it's basically this thinking around, how do you have a decentralized network, a decentralized production and storage from the sun, and then from there, additional electricity can then be shared peer-to-peer around homes. Then you have the government ESCOM focusing on all the critical infrastructure. It has to be managed by
them.
It's managed by the government. That is what I think about that. Because private institutions, if I say I'm going to close my company tomorrow because of my personal problems and all of that, and me closing the company affects the hospital and affects, all the
schools,
different
sure.
schools and all of that. You don't want that to happen.
Yeah,
So you
100%.
want all the critical infrastructure, all the hospitals, the banking, the finance, all the
Railways
data,
or whatever,
all the data centers that house government information, critical information. All of that should be managed. That power should be managed by the government. They just have better resources and information around who might be trying to come against us, in a way. So that's sort of my thinking. So you have the government, ESCOM, managing all the critical infrastructure, and then you have ESCOM managing their grid on there, and then ESCOM empowering every homeowner to have their own solar and their own battery, their own storage, and making sure that the grid is ready for that future.
It's this is coming from a electrical engineer, by the way, for those who are listening, professional engineer as well, right? And we're talking about the hierarchy of needs, Maslow's, and I think it was sort of bleeding from the metrics, right? Please advise the workforce. We have called the name of the listeners the workforce because they're the workforce of the company, because we are working to make the company or the whole country work, right? Please give career advice for some of the listeners who are saying that we want to sort of get something which we can sort of learn for ourselves and how to position ourselves to become better, bigger players in our country.
I mean, so definitely the workforce is quite important. Like, I mean, if you read Adam Smith, you realize that a big central part. He says so. It seems that the economy, at least capitalism in the way that we understand it, it is this. It's like the hand of God is like working on there. It just seems as if so. In practical terms, you don't go to the bakery because you like the baker. You go to the bakery because you want bread, in a way. And the baker doesn't bake the bread because they like you. They don't bake the bread because they like you. They bake the bread because they know you're going to give them cash, in a way. So there's this whole exchange in the market based on incentives, right? There's this exchange in the market that happens based on the incentives. I'll give you that, and you give me that. I'll give you that, you give me that, and you give the person that, and give the other person that.
100%.
And there is this whole level of value creation that starts to happen on different layers. And the individuals that create all things being constant, and I'll put that in quotes, and I'll come back to that. All things being constant, the individuals that create more value get a bigger reward, in a way. So the people that create value for more people, maybe you have a platform that you charge 1 cent, but you have like 1 billion people on the platform. You're creating value for more people at a cheap price. You get a lot of value out of it personally as a value creator. So if you're part of the workforce, you are creating value of some sort. Either it's a service where you're basically doing some service, or you're selling a product, but you're creating some sort of value. And one of the critical things to think about is, what value am I actually creating? What is my contribution?
100%. Yeah.
Am I helpful? What is my role that I'm playing to help the next person in the world? That's the first thing. The second thing is, you get to like, okay, cool. Now I understand the value that I'm creating, and that's perfectly defined. How do I ensure that I get the value I deserve, what I deserve from the value I create? And there is a role that the government plays into that around regulation. just making sure that the market actually works the way it should work. You're just saying all things being constant, but things are not constant.
100%, yeah.
Which means you need the referee, the government, to say, okay, cool, look, I think the minimum wage should increase, right? All of that. So the government runs that, become a regulatory body that basically is a referee that basically manages that whole process in a way. Okay, so you understand your value. You understand that there's a referee that is in place to basically manage that whole process. Then the third thing is you start bargaining on how much you should be paid for your value that you're basically driving on there. So if you're being paid, for example, less, maybe your product is not that great. That's one way to look at it. Maybe your skills are not really that great. That's another way to look at it. And the reality is we're not living in our grandparents' world right now. It's a completely different society. The things have changed. So the biggest advice right now is be changing as quickly as you can. You have to move at the pace where the world is moving right now. Gone are the days where you're going to work for like one company the rest of your life. It's not going to happen. It doesn't make sense. If you are an engineer, you're going to be doing a lot of different work than you used to be doing in a whole different way. A part of that is how is the AI technology going to affect my work? And that is a big question because that is coming. How is it going to affect my value creation process? And a lot of people are worried, okay, because it's going to take jobs and all of that. But the reality is it's going to be very good at assisting you to make sure that you can produce that value quicker and better.
So efficiency
is built in into that. So like what I was saying is like, I was telling you a story of, okay, cool. I look at it as you're going to have these AI agents which are working for a boss who's basically managing different AIs. So our work of the future is going to be managing different AIs, managing an AI at home,